but that does get us to 10 o'clock, so we can go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone, my name is Elizabeth. Thank you guys for coming out here to Gettysburg National Military Park today to come on this battle walk on the 14th Connecticut here at Gettysburg. Now this is a 2-hour program. We may finagle it a little bit if it starts to get a little too hot for us, but we are going to be walking quite a bit. We're starting right here. We're making our way all the way out to the middle of what today we would call the Pickett's Charge battlefield towards a place called the Bliss Farm. We're going to be making our way there and back. I'm going to endeavor to get us in the shade at the very end of the program, and we're going to stay in the shade right here to get the beginnings. We're going to try and take advantage of that as much as we can, but definitely bring water. If you need to drop out at any point because of this heat, please take care of yourselves. Please don't make me have to use the radio. I'm a typical millennial. I don't like making phone calls, so please do me that favor at least today. But I do want to go ahead and begin right at the beginning, because this is a unit that not a lot of folks tend to talk about. When we talk about July 3rd, we kind of have a focus a little bit beyond where the 14th Connecticut will be placed. And the 14th Connecticut is not a unit that people talk about on July 1st or 2nd because they're just not really here. In fact, where we are now located here in the cemetery parking lot is fairly close to where they will wind up on July 2nd. But it takes them a little bit longer to actually get to where we will be heading just a little bit, where their main line is going to be. But before we can really get into what they are doing here, I think we need a little bit of information on what exactly the 14th Connecticut is, who is involved in them, and what experience they have, because that is very, very important. Are they a veteran unit? Have they been here in battle before? Or are they brand new at Gettysburg? The simple answer is no, they are not brand new at Gettysburg. They've been around a little under a year at this point. 14th Connecticut is going to be kind of formed and created between about May and August of 1862. So a little under a year of being in the military itself. Now they have an interesting thing in the fact that they do struggle to actually get their numbers up. When they are actually beginning their kind of enlistments, beginning in May and June, not a whole lot of people want to enlist. The war has been going on for over a year at this point, and people are getting a little tired and like, well, I don't need to be going out. The war will come to an end on its own, but by about July, August, people start to realize this is not coming to an end on its own. Abraham Lincoln, the President of the United States, is going to call out for 300,000 more volunteers. Connecticut has a quota to fill, and folks in Connecticut start to look around and go, okay, it's now our time. We need to actually enlist. We need to go into this war. And so enlistments are going to begin to skyrocket, beginning in the end of July of 1862. By the end of August, they will finally have their full quota of over 1,000 men coming from 86 different towns throughout Connecticut. 86 different towns. So I can't give you one specific place that all these men are coming from, but they are coming from all of those towns, coming all over. And there are going to be a number of soldiers throughout there. There's 1,000 of them when they first enlist. I cannot tell you 1,000 stories, as much as I wish I could. So I have picked 2 soldiers to tell you guys a little bit about today, kind of followed their stories throughout the beginning all the way to here at Gettysburg. Now unfortunately I only have a photograph for one of them. The other one, unfortunately, there's no photograph. But so we'll start with William Bliss Hinks. And that middle name is going to be kind of ironic as it gets down towards the end. William Bliss Hinks here was born in 1841 in Bucksport, Maine. He's going to be born there, but by 1850 he has moved down to Bridgeport, Connecticut. He's the oldest of 4 children, and he's got a pretty decent life there in Bridgeport, Connecticut. He's young when he moves there, and so he's got time to learn what Connecticut's like, to kind of fall in love with the state. By 1860, the census says that he is being a bookkeeper. So he's gone to work, and he's fairly young when the war breaks out, and so immediately doesn't enlist. War will be over by Christmas. It's all fine. Christmas comes and goes. War is still going on. Summer arrives. War is still here. They begin to make those calls for the enlistments, and he waits until about July 22nd before he is finally going to decide that it's time for him to actually enlist. He's going to enlist in Company A of the 14th Connecticut. He enlists as a simple private, but he's pretty good at his job. He climbs the ranks fairly quickly. As the war continues on, as he becomes kind of more experienced, by June 16th of 1863, he is promoted to Sergeant Major. So he has rank. He's in command of some of these men. He knows what he is doing. And that's pretty impressive, because at the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863, he is 22 years old. But he's made the rank of Sergeant Major. And And he's going to have a very interesting story. And he knows a lot of the men who are around him. Being from there in Bridgeport, he would have been listed with men that he probably knew, friends, school buddies. He knows a lot of these men by name. He's going to be able to learn what it means to be a soldier as time goes on. But he's not the only one who is enlisting. There is a second soldier who will be enlisting during this same time period. And unfortunately, I don't have a photograph of him. None exists as far as I'm able to tell. But he's a little bit younger. His name is Thomas Jefferson Brainerd. However, he did not go by his first name. Everyone just simply referred to him as Jeff or Little Jeff. So throughout the program, I'll simply be referring to him as Jeff or Little Jeff as well. And we know far less about Little Jeff than we know about William Heaps. We know that that Thomas Brainerd would have been born about 1844, and that's all I know. We don't know if he was born in the state of Connecticut, if he was born elsewhere and came to Connecticut. According to the 1860 census, he's just not living in Connecticut. We cannot find any information on him before then. Nothing on his family, on how many siblings he has, on if his parents are alive. We don't really know anything. Simply what we know is that by 1862, he is in Bloomfield, Connecticut, working as a farmer. And we know that because when he decides to enlist on July 29th, 1862, so a couple days after William Heaps, in a different company, in Company F, we know that he is going to have his information written down. On these enlistment papers, they typically write down a description of what the soldier looks like, where they reside, and their occupation. So that's how come we know he's a farmer. How come we know he's about 19 years old? How come we know that he lived in Bloomfield, Connecticut? And we also know a description. No photograph, but we know that he had black hair, hazel eyes, a light complexion. We also have an idea of where he gets his nickname from. So remember I said he's called Little Jeff. Well, his height is listed as 5'3.5". So he's a little bit on the shorter side, just barely standing above the muskets that he would have been carrying. So you can imagine he probably got his nickname because of his size. But it didn't seem to stop him. Didn't seem to be too upsetting for him to be called Little Jeff, because a lot of the men are going to remember him very fondly. Years after the war, people are going to recall him as being the life of the company, full of rollicking fun. In fact, one of his favorite things to do, it seems, was to show off how much energy he had. To be able to run around, even as they're going on these long marches, as they're beginning to head down towards the war itself, and just do gymnastics, start tumbling around, go jumping backwards. Basically, he was the person that in the morning none of us probably want to meet before the coffee. It's one of those kind of energetic 19-year-old kids. And they both would have been in this unit, learning what it means to be soldiers. Both of these men are going to be officially mustered into the Union Army on August of 1862. And very shortly after, they're going to be leaving Connecticut, perhaps sometimes, for some of them, for the very first time. They begin to march down towards Washington, D.C. They're going to arrive in Washington, D.C. on August 25th of 1862, just a few days after they've formally been mustered in. They're still learning what it means to be soldiers at this point. They're still kind of receiving that manual of arms, the drills, learning how to march in time. But they're doing pretty good. It seems like many of them are fast learners, or according to themselves, they are fast learners. So you can imagine. As they arrive there in Washington, D.C., as many other units have done before and will do after them, they're going to parade throughout Washington, D.C. The President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, is going to be watching many of these units parading through. And you can imagine it's a long day, watching a lot of these men come through time after time again. And so he's going to get a little bit distracted. Right as the 14th Connecticut walks by, they say that they look up and they see Abraham Lincoln looking around talking, not really paying attention. And so one man's going to say that President Lincoln was so busy we felt we were not to be noticed. So we struck up loudly, singing, "We are coming, Father Abraham, 300,000 more." At once he faced us, straightened up his tall form, doffed his high silk hat, and bowed until we were by. But basically they're like, you are going to pay attention to us. Keep your eye on the 14th Connecticut. And Abraham Lincoln will. Keeps an eye on the 14th Connecticut until they go by, continues watching the rest of that parade. The 14th Connecticut will soon receive their orders. Will soon learn that they're not simply going to stay in Washington, D.C., but that they are quickly going to be heading straight into enemy territory, heading straight down into Virginia. Is anyone here from Virginia? Good, hopefully this means that this next quote won't insult you too bad. Because on August 26th of 1862, William Hinks is going to be crossing over into Virginia. 14th Connecticut is going to be alongside him, and William Hinks is going to ride afterwards that we crossed over the bridge and found ourselves upon the sacred soil of Virginia. And very nasty soil it is. Thick yellow dust lay 3 inches deep, and we were surrounded by a dense cloud of it. So he's not too thrilled with Virginia. Upon immediately walking in, he's immediately covered in dust, suddenly beginning to learn that maybe a soldier's life is not as extravagant, not as elegant as people make it out to be. He's very quickly going to learn that a lot of soldiering life is just walking through dust after dust, and if it rains, walking through the mud that is formed. They arrived in Virginia at the end of August of 1862. They're going to begin to go throughout September, beginning to join up with their new organizations. On September 7th of 1862, they experienced their very first casualty, their very first loss in this war. And it's not going to be a battle loss. It's not even going to be a loss from disease. Instead, the first death in their unit, a man by the name of James McVeigh, is going to die of exhaustion on the march. So you can imagine, for William Hinks, for little Jeff Brainerd, for the 1,000 of other men who are going around watching and learning what it means to be a soldier, suddenly they find their first death. A man that they would have known, who dies not in battle, but of exhaustion in this march. The realities of war slowly begin to set in. They're going to set in incredibly quickly for the 14th Connecticut. Because on September 17th, 1862, the 14th Connecticut will see the elephant. They'll see their very first battle for the first time at the Battle of Antietam, the single bloodiest day in American history. Nearly 17,000 casualties in one day alone. They haven't even been in the Army a month. And suddenly they're at one of the worst battles to experience during the American Civil War. They go into battle and they're green, they're brand new, they barely know what they are doing. But according to one of the men, they are going to behave well, at least for green troops, he says. The men fired with precision and deliberation, though some shut their eyes and fired into the air. For the first time, they're facing the possibility that they may have to take another human life. Facing that reality of war, of combat, of looking forward and realizing this is now very real. But they hold themselves well, and they are going to take heavy casualties. In the very first engagement they are in, they're going to lose 147 men. Of that number, 33 are killed. Suddenly things get a little bit quieter for them. Suddenly things get a little bit more real, but they are just now in the military. Many of these men have signed up for 3 years or until the end of the war. They are in it for the long haul. And very quickly, they're going to see more and more combat. A few months later, in December of 1862, they are going to be at the Battle of Fredericksburg, there in Virginia. Yet again, another terrible battle for the Union Army. For the 14th Connecticut in particular, it's going to be a devastating one, because they're going to be involved in the charges against Marie's Heights, right there near what today would be called the Sunken Road. Charging across an open field, up against heavily fortified men behind a stone wall, simply being cut down. One man's going to write that it was a moment when men's hearts are stricken with a dreadful expectancy, for the outlook was horrible. It is horrible. The Union Army takes massive casualties on that day. For the 14th Connecticut, they're going to lose about 126 men, 23 of whom are dead. Some of these men who they lose as casualties will eventually be able to return to the ranks, but many more will not, wounded and sent back home. So suddenly, they'll be experiencing more and more of this war. A few months later will pass by, and in May of 1863, they're in yet another battle, the Battle of Chancellorsville. Yet again, another horrible battle, especially for the Union Army. The last two, Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, are very clear Union defeats, very clear Confederate victories. Antietam is neither really Union nor Confederate. There'll be a strategic Union and tactical Union victory. The Confederate Army will retreat. For men who that's their very first battle, is that really a victory? You've suddenly lost your men for the very first time. So you can imagine what William Hinks, what little Jeff Brainerd, what many of these men are suddenly experiencing. And after the Battle of Chancellorsville, they aren't as heavily involved. They lose around 60 men, 2 of whom are killed. So things are getting a little bit better for them in some regards. But then come the orders to begin marching north. In June of 1863, things are beginning to change. Confederate armies have left Virginia, begun heading north, crossing into Maryland, crossing into Pennsylvania. And for many of the men in the Connecticut unit, they're looking around going, well, that's pretty far north. We've not necessarily been to Pennsylvania, but could they continue going further north? Could they be heading towards Connecticut? You can imagine the fears throughout the Union Army as people begin to realize the enemy is now in their homes, heading towards their families. On June 14th of 1863, 14th Connecticut is going to begin starting north. One of the men is going to write that the roads were ground to powder by the thousands of men who had preceded us, and strong men wilted down as though blasted by something in the air. I saw several cases of sunstroke, and the ambulances were soon filled up with used up men. Just like today, where it's very hot, you can already see I'm starting to sweat. These men are in wool uniforms, marching for miles and miles in the heat, not able to seek shelter in the shade, not able to sit on a nice little bench. They're simply having to keep on moving. Men begin to go down with sunstroke, with heat stroke. Begin to go down, and there will be casualties, men who are going to die of this sunstroke. All along, not just in 14th Connecticut, but in many other units as they begin making their way, eventually heading here to Gettysburg, although of course neither side really knew exactly which area they were heading to at that particular time. By June 29th, at the end of the month, they are about 32 miles away from where we now are, in a place called Uniontown, Maryland. On that day, they're going to learn that their commanding officer, the man in charge of the Union Army, of the Army of the Potomac, has changed yet again. They've already been through multiple commanders, and they've not even been in a full year. The man at Chancellorsville is a man by the name of Joseph Hooker, but he's now been officially replaced by a man named George Gordon Meade, a man from Pennsylvania that these guys probably don't know a whole lot about. They simply know that suddenly they've got a brand new commander, and that they're hearing rumors that the Confederate Army is not too far away. And so for many of these men, they're suddenly sitting around going, okay, what is about to happen? On July 1st, 1863, just a couple miles to the northern side of town, Union and Confederate forces will clash, and the fight will begin. By the end of the day, Union soldiers retreat to this hill right behind us, to Cemetery Hill. Clearly, a battle has been brought on here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, but the 14th Connecticut is not here. They're still marching, making their way until, by the end of about 8 p.m. on July 1st, they're about 2 to 3 miles outside of Gettysburg. Take the night off, take some rest. They've been marching all day long. They were 32 miles away the day before. They've now made up that 32 miles. Early on the morning of July 2nd, 1863, they're going to continue marching that final 2 to 3 miles. They're going to arrive early in the morning behind a place called Ziegler's Grove. Ziegler's Grove is located right up here, where we're going to be walking in just a few minutes. Heading straight up here, they're going to be laying somewhere behind where we are now, perhaps a little bit over the hill here. We don't know 100% sure where they are on that morning. Simply know that they are not needed at the front, and so they're just simply put back here to wait for a position to open up. So they'll be remaining right back here, but they don't have that 1,000 men that they had started off with the year before. When they had enlisted in August of 1862, there was over 1,000 men. By the time they arrive here at Gettysburg, the casualties they've taken on these marches, the casualties they've taken in battle, the diseases that have run rampant throughout camps, have left them with only around 160 men in the ranks by the time they arrive here at Gettysburg. As they arrive here at Gettysburg, William Hinks, Jeff Brainerd, all these 160 other men, they are veterans of this war. They have been through various combats, they have seen fighting, and they know what is waiting for them. As they begin to arrive here and begin to rest, they know that something is going to happen. Now, they are not going to simply be laying right here where we are at. By the end of the day, things begin to change here at Gettysburg. On July 2nd, you're going to see in the afternoon, on the southern end of the battlefield, fighting begins to pick up. That evening, you're going to see fighting over at Culp's Hill on the other end of the battle, but 14th Connecticut is not called up, at least not for the combat. However, they are called up to move out of Ziegler's Grove, out of that kind of reserved position, up to a stone wall. We're going to be heading towards that stone wall here in a little bit. So they head up towards that stone wall and spend much of the afternoon just watching the fighting happening down to the southern end of the battlefield, watching skirmishing going on a small property about halfway between the two ridge lines that the Union Confederate soldiers have made up. They're sitting there knowing that they're soon going to be involved, knowing that soon something is going to change, and that they are going to be called up into this battle. But that night, they're still laying behind that wall. One of the men in Company B is going to write that night we lay our knapsacks plumb up to the base of the stone wall and pillowed our heads thereon, not being allowed to divest ourselves of any other arms or equipment. We sought for the rest and sleep we so much needed. Arnold's Rhode Island battery just to the left of us finally quieted down, although I think we could have slept notwithstanding that. Jokes at the beginning of this program that today I'm tired. I'm nothing compared to these men. These men are flat out exhausted. Artillery is going to go off throughout the night, but they will find themselves being able to sleep, find themselves able to get that rest, until early the next morning, the morning of July 3rd, 1863, when they are going to wake up and find themselves being called up, really for the first time. Many of their men are going to be sent out throughout that evening and into the morning, sent out along the Emmitsburg Road as skirmishers. Heading out there, just kind of keeping an eye out, making sure Confederates don't get too close. Throughout the night, they'll lose their first casualties here at Gettysburg. 4 men are going to be captured and just go a little bit too far out, get into the Confederate lines. Those 4 men will eventually be paroled and returned back to their unit by September. But suddenly, the next morning, they go out there and like, where are our men? For many of these men, that picket line, that skirmish line, is going to be where much of their fighting is going to take place throughout the morning of July 3rd. But to talk about that skirmish line, I think we need to actually be able to see where it was taking place. And so we are going to begin our nice little walk. We're going to start heading towards the Emmitsburg Road. But before we head out that way, are there any questions? No? Alrighty, so we're going to start making our way through the sun. So we're now currently standing on what today most of us would simply call the Pickett's Charge battlefield. If you've ever heard that talk about the angle before, this is the angle. You're quite literally right where that story takes place. But the 14th Connecticut are not at the angle. Instead, if you look back up where we just were walking, see that little small monument with the little shamrock, the 3-leaf clover on top. That is going to be the 14th Connecticut's monument. And so when we talk about them being behind the stone wall, that is the stone wall we are talking about. Now I want you guys to take note of the terrain. We're not going to talk about it just yet, but notice how it rolls, notice if there's hills, things like that. We need to jump back into our story. We're not quite to the afternoon of July 3rd. We're instead at the morning on July 3rd, 1863. The skirmish lines for the 14th Connecticut are mostly out here along the Emmitsburg Road, where you can see all of these vehicles crossing by now. Now they're going to be out there a little bit on the other side as well. They've lost those 4 men the night before, 4 men captured. So they know that the skirmish line is a dangerous position to be. The rest of their men are right up along that stone wall, just waiting to see what's going to happen. Throughout the night, these men are regularly going to be changed out, and in the morning, there's going to be one of those shift changes. They're going to begin to go out there to try and replace the men who've been there throughout the night. As they do that, though, it's going to be a little bit of a difficult job. Because for many of these men, they now are going to have to make their way out, and there's no shelter. There's nothing to hide behind, nothing to provide them cover, and there are going to be Confederate sharpshooters just on the other side, their own skirmish lines out there waiting. And I mentioned that there has been skirmishing at some buildings. Now, if you look out there today, there are no buildings. There's going to be a reason for that, and we're going to discover that reason at our next stop. If you can look kind of where all of those pine trees are located at. Roughly in that area, for where we can see now, is where those buildings would have been located. A large barn and a large house. All throughout the day before, Union and Confederate soldiers have been skirmishing throughout there, trying to maintain control of what was called the Bliss property, owned by a family named, owned by a family named Bliss. And we'll talk more about them when we actually get out to where their property was. But for the 14th Connecticut, they've been watching that happening, and they know that there's going to be some skirmish firing coming back. The Confederates are in control, and as they go out there, it's going to be dangerous for them to go and switch out. And so many of them are just going to run as quickly as they can, trying to switch out. Oftentimes when they get to that road, they're going to hit the ground and start kind of crawling around to replace the men in front of them. As some of these men go out there to do that, they're looking around trying to make sure that everyone from the previous companies are being replaced. And they start to notice that one man hasn't talked in quite some time. A man by the name of Samuel Huxham, only about 25 years old, has been quiet for the past several hours. And so one of his friends goes crawling over to him, hoping that he'll be able to find him and be like, hey, we're good to go. We can go back and get some breakfast. We can get some much needed rest. He's going to walk over, or crawl over, I should say. He's going to see that Samuel Huxham is kneeling at the fence. His gun is up, pointed straight out towards that Bliss property. but he's not moving. Friend's going to go over, he's going to tap him on the shoulder, trying to make sure that he's okay, and Samuel Huxham will not respond. He's going to roll him over, he's going to realize there's a bullet right between his eyes. And Samuel Huxham, at some point during the night, had gone up on his knees to get a better shot at what he thought might be an enemy, but the enemy got the shot off first. And he dies in the position that he was in. There's nothing they can do, they simply leave his body and replace the man beside him. Continue on that skirmishing throughout the day, still looking out, and it's the first death casualty. The first death. And they're looking there going, okay, how many more are to come? So they're waiting at that skirmishing line, they're watching, because very early in that morning, firing is going to begin. They can hear it happening beyond the ridges, beyond where we can see, beyond over by Culp's Hill, starting early in the morning around 4 o'clock. And then shortly thereafter, at that property, the firing picks up yet again. For the 14th Connecticut, they've not been fully involved. They've done some skirmishing over out on that road, but not much has been going on. So they're sitting here, quietly behind their stone wall, waiting for their turn to go up and replace those skirmishers, watching that skirmish firing, wondering exactly when they're going to be called in. And the answer is going to be about 10 o'clock in the morning. As the firing over at Culp's Hill begins to slowly die off, 14th Connecticut is going to be told that it is now their turn to go out to that Bliss property. And you can see from where we're at, that looks fairly far away. As they reach the road, it's about 600 yards to that property. Now, of course, they're not standing exactly where we are. They're going to be a little bit further down, as their line is a little bit to your right. They're going to be going kind of where the solitary tree is in that car that's parked, heading straight there, running straight across, and they've been watching for the past day what happens as you go out there. So you are exposed to all of that Confederate fire, and very quickly the officers in charge realize if they go out in military precision, if they go out shoulder to shoulder, long line of battle, it's not going to end well. And so they're going to kind of modify their normal orders. They're going to create a new order called scatter and run, which is exactly what it sounds like. Instead of the order forward march, when the order to scatter and run comes, they are simply just take off running, just sprint across that 600 yards as quickly as they can and hope that they'll be able to make it to the safety of that barn, the safety of that home, and hopefully get behind as quickly as they can. One single man doing a zigzag, hopefully he has a better chance. They're going to be going, almost all of them, setting out in 2 different companies, or in 2 different lines, I should say. Heading out, one heading towards the barn, one heading towards the house itself. All 160 of them are those that remain heading towards that direction. Around 10 o'clock, they're all going to begin to start heading down through the field that we now stand in, heading towards that road. Form up at that road. And you can imagine what they're thinking on that day. Looking for that 600 yards where they're going to have to just run. Probably looking at each other to say a final goodbye, thinking of what is going to come next. One man is going to say that as they begin to take off, that it will be like dodging 10,000 shafts of lightning. He's not wrong. Soon that order comes. The order to take that building, scatter and run. They're going to begin taking off, just running as quickly as they can, sprinting across the field, heading towards those buildings, and little Jeff Brainerd is right there with them. He's small, but he is fast. He's got all that energy that we were talking about, remember? He's right at the very front, just sprinting as quickly as he can. In fact, he's sprinting so fast, he has time to glance behind and see how other people are faring. He looks back and he happens to notice that there's a couple guys running not quite as energetically as he thinks they should be. So he decides he's going to yell some encouragement at them. He looks behind and he shouts out to them, "Come on, you cowards!" We don't know if it works or not, but it definitely probably encouraged a couple of people, if only for their pride. He's going to turn around after yelling that, just continue running, trying to bank as quickly as he can towards that barn, when suddenly he goes flying backwards, starts tumbling through the ground and hits that ground itself. And a lot of guys just keep on running by. It's just little Jeff joking around. It's just him having some rollicking fun. But then as they start to run by, he starts to cry out. William Hinks is going to run by, and he recalls seeing little Jeff lying on the ground, calling out, "Oh my God, I am hurt. It hurts me." It's around that time that they realize little Jeff isn't joking around. Little Jeff has fallen as a casualty. He has been shot. A couple of the men who are behind him are going to immediately bend down to see how he is. Is he okay? Is he need some help? Maybe even the same men he's been calling cowards. We don't know. They're going to bend down. They realize quickly this is a serious wound. A bullet has gone in through one shoulder and exited out of his chest. It is bad. And so a couple of men are going to realize that if they leave him out there in the middle of that field, it's not going to end well. They need to get him back behind the lines to safety to a hospital as quickly as they can. And so a couple of men are going to risk that. They're going to take him and bring him back along the path we now stand on, heading back beyond the ridge line, somewhere behind probably where they had been staying the night before. We don't know exactly which hospital he's going to be taken towards. We know he's taken somewhere back behind Cemetery Ridge, where he'll be laid down, and those few men who had helped him out are going to come back out here. Whether or not they make it all the way out to the farm, we do not know. They're going to lay his body back there, and little Jeff is still alive, still crying out in pain. Around that time, the chaplain of the 14th Connecticut, a man by the name of Henry Stevens, happens to be back there, helping with other wounded men. As he begins to look around, he spots little Jeff, and he recognizes him instantly. It's little Jeff. He's always the one having fun, keeping up the laughter. He goes over and he immediately bends down, takes little Jeff by the hand, starts wiping the sweat from his brow, and he calls the doctor over. The doctor walks over, kneels behind little Jeff's head, doesn't even touch him. He simply stands up and shakes his head. There's nothing he can do. It is clear on one look that this is a mortal wound. And for Henry Stevens, for this chaplain, he's suddenly left to figure out, how do you tell a 19-year-old kid that they're about to die? How do you tell a 19-year-old child that they are not going to see the end of the day? And he says that he takes a few moments, tries to find the words, kind of continues wiping that sweat and that blood away, and he finally just looks at him and says, "What shall we think of you, Jeff? What shall we think of you?" In that moment, little Jeff realizes he's going to die. And kind of gathers himself, tries to think of what he wants to say, and he's going to look up at the chaplain, kind of squeeze his hand, and he's going to say, "Tell my mother, tell my," and he dies. He doesn't get out his final words. We don't know what he wanted to tell his mother. We don't even know his mother's name. Just that in his final moments, he's not thinking of the fight going on behind him. He's not thinking of whether his men have made it out to that building, if they are continuing that fight. His mind is not on the war at all. It's at a place back home in Connecticut, thinking of a mother who we don't know how she's going to react. We don't know when she is going to be told that her son has died. We don't even know her name. We know that he cared enough about her that in his final moments, she is what he is thinking about. In his final moments, he wants to tell his mother something. "I love you. I'm sorry. I wish I could see you again." We don't know. Just as his final thoughts are occurred. For little Jeff, he's going to die right there, somewhere behind this hill, just simply laying back there, and the chaplain's going to resignedly kind of close little Jeff's eyes, lay his hand back down, and go on to the next wounded man. Because there will be more wounded. 14th Connecticut is still in the middle of this action. Little Jeff is one of the first to fall, but he will not be the last. The rest of these men are still scattering and running, heading out towards that property. Some will make it, some will not. But many will make it out to those buildings. Many are going to make it out there and begin to have to fight over those few buildings. And very quickly they're going to realize why skirmishing has been going on for so long, and neither side has been able to hold on to those buildings. But to talk about those, I think we need to head out to where those buildings actually were. As you can see, they're not there today, but we're going to find out why at our next stop. Are there any questions before we start heading across the road? Alrighty, let's make our way into the sun then. We'll let everyone catch up. Feel free to look around a little bit if you like. Our 14th Connecticut monument is going to be right here. Hence why we're stopping at the large random pile of brush. Alright, for those of you in the back, everyone feeling okay?
Yep.
Awesome. Just want to make sure, double check on everyone. Love the guy who was smart enough to bring an umbrella. I am jealous. Alright, so we have made it out here to the location of the Bliss Farm. Now, as I said, there's nothing left here. So you're going to have to use a little bit of your imaginations on this stop to imagine what the 14th Connecticut is finding as they begin to scatter and run. If you look back up in the direction we just walked from, you'll see the little white buildings that we passed. That's the Abraham Bryan Farm, a farm owned by a free black farmer here in Gettysburg. He and his family have left before the battle began, and so that farm is empty. It's being used in some cases as an aid station, it's a headquarters building, but it's going to be right there, a great landmark for us right now. 14th Connecticut is along that stone wall where we just were, kind of making a more direct route to get out to this location. That's scatter and run. Now the house itself would have sat, if you look, you'll see these kind of three monuments. The furthest one from us marks roughly where the house would have sat, and And this large pile of brush behind me marks where the barn itself would have been. Now, there are no photographs of the William Bliss property, but there is a sketch that was done by someone unknown in 1863, which gives you a fairly decent idea of what this place actually would have looked like. Of course, it shows it before the battle, not during. During the battle, this place would have been a hotbed of activity. And the buildings itself are going to be fairly large. William Bliss was living here before the battle, and he and his wife Adeline and their two young daughters, Sarah and Frances, are inside this home on July 1st, 1863. But as the day goes on, refugees from the first day's battlefield begin arriving, telling them exactly what has been happening, and they realize that their property right here is probably not a good place to be. And so the Bliss family, as well as some of those first day refugees, begin to leave, begin to make their way back towards Little Round Top, where they're going to stay at the Jacob Weichert farm east of Little Round Top. So they're going to leave this hotbed of activity for another hotbed of activity. But it's at least a little bit safer for them there than it would have been out here. Because this building itself is large. And look at where we're standing. We're about halfway between Cemetery Ridge, where we've just come from, and Seminary Ridge, right behind us here. If you look off to your left, you'll see that Virginia Memorial, kind of the center of that line of what we typically think of for Pickett's Charge. Directly behind us, behind this kind of large brush pile, is the Tennessee and North Carolina monuments. Again, marking directly where the Confederates are. And these two buildings are very large. The home itself was a frame building about 2 stories in height with 3 rooms inside of it. But the barn, one man says, was almost a citadel. It was about 70 feet long, 35 feet wide, constructed of stone and bricks along the bottom, and the rear was banked to the first floor. Just a very typical Pennsylvania bank barn. Very, very typical for the time period. But a citadel almost to itself. A safe haven for the 14th Connecticut, who have been scattering and running, seeing men like little Jeff fall, but unable to do much for him, continuing to make their way out to where we now stand. Some taking refuge in the house that would have been over there, some coming straight to that barn. Those who go to the house first quickly realize that's not a good place to be. It's going to be predominantly made out of kind of this whiplash kind of material, and so it's not the best building. It doesn't stop a bullet. And so eventually many of the men who take refuge in that house are going to have to brave the fire to come into the barn. But they're going to make it out here. They're going to make it out here in force, and they're going to be able to push those Confederate skirmishers out of the buildings. They're not going to go far. Some will make it back towards Seminary Ridge. Others will simply stay in the orchards that were dotted around the property. Continuing up that skirmish fire. And for the 14th Connecticut, this is an interesting time because they've been watching throughout the day before, throughout that morning, as this kind of push and shove comes to play. As the Confederates take control for a little bit, and then the Union takes control for a little bit, and then it kind of goes back and forth, back and forth. But they've been told as they were coming out here that they are here to stay. To stay in these buildings, to keep this property in Union hands. That's why they sent the entire unit, a large force, to come out here to stay. Easier said than done. Because as these men begin to arrive inside this barn, they begin that skirmishing, begin to fire out across at those skirmishers who are all around, and they suddenly begin to receive artillery fire. Union and Confederate artillery both begin to kind of target these buildings halfway in between. There's not much else going on between 10 and 11 o'clock that morning. Fighting at Culp's Hill is beginning to die down. And so this becomes that hotbed. This is where people begin to look for. As they begin to take these buildings at all hazards to stay here, they realize that this is going to be a very, very difficult job for them. They begin to realize as they begin to take massive casualties. So that artillery begins to fire. One man's going to say that the men feared their own doom was sealed. The second story of the barn, right above where we're now standing, men had taken shelter inside of there. Men from the 14th Connecticut are peering out through the little gaps in the walls, beginning to fire, trying to keep up that skirmish fire, when an artillery shell comes bursting through and explodes inside of the barn. Several men are going to be struck, one of them being Moses Clements, about 31 years old. He's killed almost instantly when that shell explodes. Killed on this barn. His brother John is right beside him, going to be wounded. The family friend is standing beside him, completely unharmed. But now he's watched one of his friends be hurt and the other fully killed. And he's probably thinking back about how Moses has a friend, a wife at home, and a young child, not even a year old. And suddenly he's sitting there going, this wife, this daughter, or this child, excuse me, they've now lost their father. What are they going to know about his death? So for that man, he has to look and be like, I have to stay alive to tell them what happened. For Moses' brother John, you can imagine what he's thinking. He's just watched his brother be killed in front of his eyes. But the fighting is still going on. Artillery continues to go through. More men are going to fall wounded, and they begin to fire, and it very quickly becomes obvious to everyone around here that there is no keeping these buildings. There is no way for either the Union or the Confederates to maintain control of these buildings. It's just too much of a hotbed. And so back along Seminary Ridge, there's going to be a commanding officer by the name of Alexander Hayes, who's in charge out there. He's looking out. He's been ordering this firing all throughout the day before and all throughout this morning. He'd been the one to send the 14th Connecticut in. And at this point, he looks forward, and around 11 o'clock, he realizes it's hopeless. There is no staying out here. But he can't just pull these men back. He can't just bring them back here and let the Confederates have this property, because if they get inside here and there's no one pushing them out, well, now they can sharpshoot right up there. They can make this a very dangerous position. And so it becomes fairly obvious fairly quickly, the only thing that is left to do is to burn these buildings. The 14th Connecticut was not given those orders. 14th Connecticut has been told to come out here to stay, to hold these buildings at all hazards, which means someone has to run the risk of coming from that ridgeline out here to deliver the orders to burn these two buildings. There are going to be two men who are going to be decide this. They're going to take control, to come out here on their own volition to do that, who volunteer. One of the men is going to be Sergeant Charles A. Hitchcock of the 111th New York. He's going to be coming on foot, doing that scatter and run technique. He's a lone man. He has a decent shot of making it, but they can't risk everything on just one man. And so the second man is going to volunteer to go. A man by the name of James Park Postles, who was actually serving on the staff of one of the officers here. Unfortunately, I don't have a photograph of Hitchcock, or I would also have shown you a photo of him, but we do have one of Postles here. But Postles decides that he does not want to go on foot. He believes he can get out here quicker if he rides on horseback. But imagine, you'll get here quicker, but you're on horseback. You are now standing much further off the ground, and there's no shelters. You look around. The land dips a little bit, but there's no shelter. But he decides it's worth the risk. He's going to spur his horse, and both these men are going to start running out here, one reaching the house, one reaching the barn. Miraculously, both unscathed. They make it out here, they deliver those orders. They say, Alexander Hayes, the general, wants you to burn these buildings. Return to your main line. And then they're going to make their way back. And miraculously, both of these men make it back to their lines. Charles Hitchcock's going to make it back without much ado. He's just going to simply be back there, and his job will be done. For Postles here, however, he decides he wants to be a little bit more dramatic than that. He's going to ride back, and there are going to be some men who are going to talk about how as he rides back along Cemetery Ridge, makes it all the way back, that he's going to turn his horse, doff his hat, and wave defiantly at the Confederates who have been sharpshooting at him the whole time. He's going to win the Medal of Honor for his action here on this day. Charles Hitchcock gets a little bit forgotten. So that's why I like to make sure that I mention both of them. But for the 14th Connecticut, they now have received their orders. They are now located right out here. They are now located here in these barns, with the order no longer being to stay, but to burn. And suddenly they're looking around trying to collect all the material that they possibly can. The barn had a good portion of this straw and hay inside, so they go, okay, we can use that. Some of the men are going to run that little gauntlet back over to the house. They're going to begin to remove the bed sheets, begin to remove anything flammable, and set them ablaze. They're going to begin to remove the dead and the wounded as best they can before both the barn and the house are set aflames. And you can imagine in the heat of the day, we know that the day on July 3rd is around 87 degrees. When we started this program, it was about 87 degrees, and you can feel how hot it already is as we're standing out here. Now imagine two large burning buildings, filling this ground up with smoke, and there's a light breeze. We know on that day that there was a light breeze there as well, but it was just enough to move that smoke around, not to really offer them any relief. As these buildings go up in flames, the Confederates begin to fall back a little bit, and they begin to make their way back. 14th Connecticut begins to scatter and run all the way back up towards Cemetery Ridge. Some will stop at the Emmitsburg Road, set up those skirmish lines yet again. The rest will make their way back to that stone wall. They've taken heavy casualties out here. They've seen wounded, they've seen dead, and the buildings are burning to the ground in their wake. But then, as they begin to do that, one man's going to notice a couple things. As they're going around here, he looks around and he happens to notice a couple chickens. In the midst of all this fires, these men are beginning to scatter and run, trying to save their lives. A man by the name of Albert DeForest takes a look around, sees those chickens, and goes, you know what? It's worth it. And he decides that he's going to go after those chickens. He manages to capture one of them, and he somehow manages to get that chicken all the way back to Cemetery Ridge. He becomes very popular very quickly when he gets over there because these men have not eaten since that morning. Rations have not been issued out, so they're hungry. They're tired. They've just been through a massive skirmish out here. As they get back there, they're taking tolls of who is lost, who has been wounded, who is dead, learning about little Jeff's demise for the first time from the chaplain, learning that the life of the company is gone. So you can imagine, as they get back there, having that chicken helps a little bit, to bring up the spirits a little bit, like, hey, all this has gone to hell, but we are still here. And now we've got a chicken. So they make it all the way back. They are able to get back there throughout that day, and there's going to be a little bit of a lull. By about 11 o'clock, as this fighting here comes to an end, the fighting at Culp's Hill ends, and then there's going to be a periodic skirmish fire, periodic artillery. But for the next few hours, they have a break. Time to pluck that chicken, to begin cooking it, and hope that they're able to eat it before anything else begins. But to talk about the chicken's fate, we'll get back to Cemetery Ridge and talk about that. Are there any questions before we start making our way back towards the shade? Yes?
Oh, is this pile of rubble that's behind you, is that actually the berm from the burn barn?
That is my understanding, yes, that it is kind of that bank. And then today it's just kind of become home for a lot of sharp-looking plants. I'm a historian, not a plant expert. Please don't ask me what plants. Yes, but any other questions?
How was the barn oriented? This was the bank?
That is my understanding. So it's going to be kind of the back end of the barn here with that bank here, and then on the other side. And then the house itself, I'm not 100% sure which way is orientated. If you guys want to go look at it after the program and come back out here, you're welcome to. I do want to get us out of the shade, so I'm not going to walk us over there, but at that third monument, there is still a little bit of the foundations left. I know back in the, I believe, 1990s, early 2000s, they actually did some archaeology out there to kind of figure out where the foundation was and that orientation. I'm just very bad with directions and cannot remember the direct orientation of it.
No known pictures.
Not that I am aware of, and believe me, I searched.
Yeah.
There's the sketch that I showed you, which I actually found in a couple of different books. One of them being the Struggle of the Bliss Farm by Elwood Christ, as well as in the 14th Connecticut's regimental history. They kind of were very proud of what they did out here in many ways. So,
Is this the bank they used to run tanks over when this was a tank?
I don't know 100%, but most likely
There's a
yes.
photograph
So for
of
those of you who do not know,
tank going
during
over
World
tank.
War I, this was a tank training corps called Camp Colt. And so eventual President Eisenhower was in charge. And there is a very famous photograph of a tank just shooting through the air over top of a bank somewhere on this battlefield. This is really the only bank out here, so more than likely, this has seen combat in a couple of different ways. All right, now that the breeze is finally picking up, it's time to head back. Everyone still doing all right?
Yeah.
It's better now that there's seats and shade, right?
Yeah. That's kind of my position.
All right. So welcome back to the shade, everyone.
We're the reserve unit.
Hey, it'll work. Say, feel free to take a rest on some of the rocks if you need it. Please stay in the shade. Now, we are in a kind of an interesting position. We are adjusting our tour slightly because we do have another tour group that's underneath the large tree right behind where the 14th Connecticut retreats to. So we are going to be in front of their lines, but we can still see everything, and most importantly, shade. So hopefully this will give us all a nice little break. But so, we have just walked roughly where the 14th Connecticut is retreating from. Coming back from that Bliss Farm, and you can imagine where we just were, being enclosed in fire and smoke. Looking across that battlefield, not seeing motorcycles or a cool, fresh day, but seeing a burning farm, burning to the ground, where you've just lost many of your men, where you've just lost friends, family. Coming back here, making their way, some stopping at that Emmitsburg Road, creating those new skirmish points, creating what they've been doing all day, and the rest making it directly back up to here. So as you look kind of up behind where we are now standing, As you look up there, you'll see that 14th Connecticut monument, the one with the shamrock, that three-leaf clover on top. That marks the center of where their line is. Right behind that stone wall, just about roughly from where we are, probably 75, 80 yards away from us. It's where the 14th Connecticut main line is going to be stationed on that day. They're going to be behind that wall, and originally on their left, they're going to have these artillery pieces that you can just barely see peeking up over the top. Rhode Island battery that is stationed beside them, who's in charge of firing out across this field. So you can imagine, for the men on the end of the line, it's a little bit noisy. But as they arrive back here, as they're coming back behind that main line, things quiet down a little bit. They have time for that breeze to hopefully cool them off a little bit, time to rest, to recuperate. For Albert DeForest, it's time to start plucking that chicken and start getting it cooking, to make some nice fried chicken for lunch. It's going to get started on that. I don't know if anyone's ever plucked a chicken before, but it takes a while to get it plucked, to get it prepared. So it's going to take him a few hours to get that chicken going. He starts to make a little campfire, starts to get it going nice and good. But by about 1 o'clock, things are going to change, and the fate of that chicken, well, he's probably not going to get to eat it after all. Because by 1 o'clock, things have begun to change. For Robert E. Lee, the commanding officer of the Confederate Army, he's been looking around. He's seen the skirmishing going on out here. He's seen those burning buildings. He's tried to attack the two flanks, two ends of the line the day before. He'd wanted to try that this day as well on July 3rd. Culp's Hill is very clearly in Union hands at this point. It's very clear that he's not going to be able to attack those flanks, but the flanks, the ends of the line, they have been reinforced. They are strong. Those reinforcements had to have come from somewhere. As he begins to look around, he remembers that on July 2nd, they had a brief breakthrough. Along the line where we now stand, just below this kind of clump of trees here, some men had broken through the day before. They've been pushed back by Union reinforcements, but they had broken through the Union line. If he was to try that again, to send a massive amount of men across this field that we've just crossed and aim them all right here at the center, perhaps he can break through that Union line, he can fold them up and win the Battle of Gettysburg here and now on July 3rd, 1863. But it takes some time to get those men into position, it takes some time to prepare that plan. It takes time for many of those men along Seminary Ridge to begin to stand up, to begin to move into position. But by 1 o'clock, everything is prepared to go. At 1 o'clock, artillery is going to begin firing from down further on near the peach orchard. If you see that second red barn, just a little bit further down from there is where that peach orchard is. Signal guns begin down there, one by one, up and down the line, along this ridgeline, stretching over a mile. Artillery begins to fire. Shortly thereafter, the Union guns are going to begin to open fire all along this ridgeline as well, until well over 200 cannons begin to fire around 1 o'clock in the afternoon on July 3rd, 1863. And suddenly, those burning buildings, that smoke, is going to be mixed in with artillery smoke. One man is going to say that it was almost like a volcano erupting from where they're standing, looking across, seeing all just those spitting flames as they come across. For many of these men, they're going to begin to have nothing to do. For the 14th Connecticut, all they can do is lay behind that stone wall, lay behind the Emmitsburg Road, and just hope for the best. Because there's no fighting against long-range artillery. You can just simply hug the ground. One man's going to say that the air was filled with smoke, and the strain upon the nerves as we lay hugging the ground while fragments of shell were dropping around us was great. And after a while, a reaction took place, and we dozed, only to be awakened by the bursting of a shell near or the crushing of our stone wall. For over an hour, this cannonade is going to continue. For an hour, this bombardment goes on until these men just start to fall asleep. They've been hard fighting all morning. They're hot, they're tired, they're exhausted. And so even with the cannon firing, they begin to slowly fall asleep. But for the men on the skirmish line, they begin to run into more risks. For the men on the skirmish line, many of those shot and shell are going to explode in the air above them, raining fragments down upon them. And many of the men up there are going to be struck. One of them is a 19-year-old child by the name of John Julian. 19 years old, he's somewhere along that Emmitsburg Road. A shell bursts above him, strikes him in the head, and fractures his skull. Some of his friends are going to help him get back, take him back behind the lines, take him to a field hospital where he's going to linger until July 5th. Whether or not he wakes up and feels pain, we do not know. We simply know that he'll be brought back behind these lines and die a few days later. He doesn't know what happens to the men around him. He simply knows that he's gone. For many of the men who are on that skirmish line, there's nothing they can do but hug that ground. For many of the men back here, there's nothing they can do but hope and pray. One man's going to say that no one dared stir lest a worse fate should befall him. he begins to lay down behind these lines, they begin to wait and just hope and pray that something might change. They begin to realize that some things aren't going to change. That's going to be well on an hour and a half, somewhere thereabouts. This firing continues. For William Hinks, he's somewhere at the end of this line. We don't know the exact location, but he says that he's on the extreme left of the 14th Connecticut's line. So if you look back up here, and you notice those two small cannons beside that large white piece of stone, that marks where Arnold's battery, that Rhode Island battery I mentioned, was. He's right near them, because he is going to write that the smoke was thick, so very thick that the sun seemed blotted out. No one moved or spoke save the gunners behind us, and ever and anon I could hear the ringing voice of the sergeants nearest us giving command to aim, fire, tremendous crash, load, only to be after a brief interval repeated. Then after a time I judged that he was wounded, for his voice was silenced, and out of the cloud came another and different voice, repeating the same command. Listening as these men fall wounded, only for another man to pick up and continue the exact same job. Continue on, firing across this field, trying to take out as much of the artillery as they possibly can. And that is what the Confederate artillery really is hoping that they can do. To take out the Union guns behind this line, that they can take out that mouth of hell, that they can be able to end that artillery fire here. And they will see some guns begin to be moved back. They will have some success to take out some of these artillery. In fact, Arnold's artillery is going to have to be removed, to be pulled back by near the end of that hour. And someone is supposed to replace them, but no one shows up. Orders can get miscommunicated. It takes time. And so for the 14th Connecticut, they suddenly look over and go, well, the end of our line is now nowhere near supported. And so what they're going to do is they're going to file out into a single file, take over where that Arnold's battery had once been, into a single file line. A very thin line that they now have to make. And they're going to be looking across as this artillery continues to fire, but most of that artillery is either falling short or falling high. It's not quite hitting behind that stone wall, and so the Confederate artillery is not doing quite as much damage as they were expecting to. And so for many of these men who are behind this line, they're slowly going to begin to fall quiet, to begin to watch, because they know you do not fire this much artillery, this much ammunition, unless you are planning something big, unless you're planning to follow it up with an infantry assault. And that is exactly what the Confederate Army is planning to do. Shortly after that hour or so, the Union artillery on this side of the field begins to go quiet, begins to stop firing, because they know they need to save their ammunition. So they stop firing, and over there across the field, the Confederate artillerymen begin to hope that that means that they've done it, that they have wiped out this Union artillery. And they begin to issue those orders for the infantry to step forward. As you look across this field and those wood lines, nearly 12,000 Confederate infantrymen are going to step out and begin making their way, forward march, across this field that we've already done once. And as you guys were walking up here, you noticed how kind of the terrain changes, how it's not just simply flat. Even though as you stand up along that ridgeline, it looks nice and flat, it is anything but, as you've just discovered from walking it. For the men who are going to be coming directly against the 14th Connecticut right up here, they have a little bit of an easier time in that by the Bliss Farm it is a little bit smoother, a little bit less undulating. But look at where this goes. Look at where we now stand right here at this angle, and look at how there is still an uphill to where the 14th Connecticut is behind that stone wall. Notice that equestrian statue up there. That equestrian statue, believe it or not, is on a little bit of a hill, and it looks like it is even. This terrain plays tricks on you, which means that for the Confederates who are going to be coming up straight in front of this line, they're going to be going uphill an additional 75 yards, whereas these men who are coming from directly where we're now standing, the wall here is a little bit shorter. Here at this wall, the Union Army is kind of going to be spread out. You can see where our monuments are here today, but it ends right here at this angle. Going all the way back towards between this tree and that cannon, there's no one really stationed there. You have these men, and then the 14th Connecticut, creating a bit of a gap. And the 14th Connecticut is going to note that gap. This is going to be very, very important for them. By the end of this bombardment, as they begin to look out and they see these men coming forth, they're going to begin to get a little anxious. This is a mile of open field. These guns have good range. The artillery can fire a mile. The infantry cannot. And so as these men begin to step forward and begin to make their way across this field, Union artillery opens up that long-range fire, begins to take out massive holes in those lines. But all the 14th Connecticut can do is watch, and wait, and pray. William Hinks is going to say that it was indeed an anxious moment. One man is looking at the far-off home he will never see again. Another is looking at his little ones as he mechanically empties his cartridge box on the ground before him that he may load more quickly, determined to part with his life as dearly as possible. Others are communing with him before whom so many will shortly have to appear. Quiet in the ranks, trying to figure out, are you prepared for what is coming next? Because there's not much time. As these Confederates begin to make their way back, the pickets, the skirmishers right along that line are slowly going to begin to realize we need to get back as well. They begin to retreat back up along these lines, fill back in to those gaps, begin to fill in along the main line. And now the 14th Connecticut is fully behind that stone wall just up above where we now stand. Waiting there, waiting for those Confederates to reach that Emmitsburg Road. So they begin to reach the Emmitsburg Road. Confederates themselves are going to run into problems. Note those fences. We had a nice little gap in that fence that we were able to take advantage of. I didn't make you guys climb over that fence. For many of the men, especially further on down, front of where the 14th Connecticut will be firing, they're going to have to go over those fences. They are solid fences. They've not been torn down the day before. One of the Tennesseans who's going to be going over those fences is going to say that was not a leaping over. It was rather an insensible tumbling to the ground. Tumbling to the ground and then trying to get back up as quickly as they can, reform their lines, their safety in numbers to try and make that final push. Where we now stand are going to be predominantly Virginians heading straight towards this line. Over behind me is where Tennesseans, North Carolinians, Mississippians are all going to be standing, heading straight up towards the 14th Connecticut. And the 14th Connecticut is holding their fire until within about 100 yards of the line of infantry, somewhere behind where we now stand. By the time they reach this second fence line, these Tennesseans, Mississippians, North Carolinians are going to have to begin to go over top of those fences as well, begin to tumble down, try and push that last little bit. But then they're going to come up against the 14th Connecticut, who unloads their fire. In the 14th Connecticut, two of their companies are armed with a special type of gun called the Sharp's rifle. They're much easier to load, much faster to fire. And they've lost casualties this day. They have spare guns. The men like William Hinks have begun to place beside them. Many of them have put a second man to simply load their guns for them so that the better shot is firing. And so they're having a rapid pace of fire. Many of these Confederates begin to see this little gap in this line, and they begin to try and go through that. And so many of the men at the end of this line for the 14th Connecticut begin to fire what's called the left oblique. Basically, instead of firing directly in front, they're now firing and giving a crossfire to many of these men who are trying to find that gap. There'll be a breakthrough right here near this angle. There'll be no breakthrough from the 14th Connecticut's line. 14th Connecticut unloads their fire, and one man is going to say that the angel of death alone can produce such a field as was then produced. The angel of death alone. As these Confederates begin to make their way up that final little bit, they're going to get within just a few, 15, 20 yards. They cannot make it all the way up to that fence line behind them. 14th Connecticut looks down, and they all immediately realize that they have been here before. One man is going to say that exultation had begun to swell their breast, and it would not be suppressed. And in memory of past disadvantages, this one great opportunity called out shouts, "Give it to 'em, boys! Now we've got you! Sock it to the blamed Rebs!" Fredericksburg on the other leg. When the total collapse in front came, the pursuit of the men was unrestrainable. They ran down from the wall, gathering prisoners and seizing battle flags. Fredericksburg on the other leg. That second battle the 14th Connecticut is involved in, where they had gone across roughly a mile of open field, straight up against a stone wall. Now they're behind the stone wall, looking down, firing at many of the same men they'd been fighting that day. Fredericksburg on the other leg. And for William Hinks, he is right behind that stone wall near the end where Arnold's battery had been removed from. And he's standing down at 22 years old. He's firing his guns as quickly as he can. He's got a friend loading the gun for him, firing these Sharp's rifles, putting down a massive rate of fire. And within about 50 yards, he looks forward, and somewhere in this field in front of us here, he sees 14th Tennessee's flag has been planted in the ground. The color bearer is laying down on the ground trying to seek shelter from the massive amounts of lead flying down range, but he's got that flag planted defiantly. Some of the officers are going to look around, they're going to point out that flag, and they're going to say, who will volunteer to go and capture that flag? 3 men are immediately going to leap up over that wall. One man by the name of John Broach, another named George Brigham, finally, William Hinks. They're all 3 going to not hesitate to leap over top of that wall to take off that roughly 50 yards to go and grab that flag. It's a race to see who can get there first. George Brigham is going to fall shot. Captain Broach just a little bit too slow. William Hinks is young, he is fast. He gets down there, he is going to grab that flag, and according to one of the citations that's going to come afterwards, he's going to swing his saber over the prostrate Confederates, and uttering a terrific yell, he seized the flag and hastily returned to his lines. The devotion to duty shown by Sergeant Major Hinks gave encouragement to many of his comrades at a crucial moment of the battle. The following year, in December of 1864, General George Meade is going to issue him the Medal of Honor. 22 years old, right behind that wall up there, he earns the Medal of Honor on this battlefield. He captures the flag of the 14th Tennessee. It is the first flag to be captured that day, but it is nowhere near the last. As they continue to fire down, the Confederates slowly begin to realize this is not happening. They are not getting across that line. That is too strong of a position. And the Confederate line begins to melt away, begins to fall back across this field, leaving behind the dead, the wounded, many men waving white flags, little handkerchiefs, to surrender. The only men who will make it over top either of these walls and stay across those walls are prisoners of war. For the 14th Connecticut, as they begin to rejoice and follow these men down, shouting out cries of Fredericksburg, Fredericksburg, they're going to begin to capture prisoners. Remember, they are armed with only around 160 men, and they've taken casualties. As they begin to march their prisoners back across that wall, they're going to come up with around 200 prisoners of war. More men than they have in their own ranks. And the 14th Tennessee battle flag will not be the only one captured that day. In total, there's going to be 5 battle flags captured by the 14th Connecticut. The 1st Tennessee, 14th Tennessee, 14th Virginia, 16th North Carolina, and the 52nd North Carolina are all going to lose their battle flags to the 14th Connecticut behind this wall. And as those battle flags are brought back behind the wall, as these prisoners are brought back, and they watch as that line begins to melt down, 14th Connecticut and all the Union men behind this wall are feeling elated for the first time in a very, very long time. For Alexander Hayes, he's feeling exceptionally elated. One man's going to write that right upon the close of the action, among other expressions of exuberant rejoicing, General Hayes came cantering by, sans coat, sans hat, his shirt loosened at the throat, holding in each hand a rebel battle flag, which he was trailing upon the ground amid the cheers of our exultant troops. The evening was a glad one to us. The 14th was never so happy. They've only known defeat for the most part. They've known defeat, they've known hesitant victory, but for the first time behind this wall, in nearly a year of being in this army, these men have known true victory. They're going to watch as those Confederates continue to make their way back. Night is going to begin to fall, and by the next day, the Confederate army is going to begin to retreat. Begin to head back towards Virginia. The Battle of Gettysburg will come to an end, a decisive Union victory. The story for the 14th Connecticut is not done. They're still behind that wall, but early the next day, they're going to have to go forward. They're going to have to start to take measure of how many men they have lost. They came in with 160 men in their ranks. They're going to lose around 70 of them, 10 of whom are killed, among them being 19-year-old little Jeff Brainerd. Little Jeff's body is going to be left behind, somewhere behind that ridge, somewhere near that hospital where Henry Stevens had been able to hold his hand and be with him as he died, where he was able to comfort him as best he could. But at some points, little Jeff's body is lost. There's no dog tags during this time period, and so he apparently had no identification on him. If you go up to the National Cemetery today and go to that Connecticut's plot, you will find Moses Clement, but you will not find little Jeff Brainerd. You don't know what happens to him. More than likely, he lies in that National Cemetery, a simple number, an unknown soldier. We don't know what his mother is told. We don't know what she thinks. She's ever able to come down here and visit the site where her son breathed his last. Little Jeff is just one of many. For the 14th Connecticut, now the time comes to go out on burial detail. The morning of July 4th, they're going to begin to come out, to start walking around through these fields. As they begin to come out here, they're going to, as they say, quote, find the dead in some places so numerous that the ground appeared covered by them. One could walk for distances, stepping only on the bodies of the slain. The Emmitsburg road directly in our front seemed packed with them. Vast hecatombs to the insatiate Moloch of the cruel and causeless slaveholders' rebellion. Many of the men that night and the night after on July 5th, they're going to try and get as much sleep as they can. There's still wounded men out here. There's a limited number of ambulances. It takes time to get to every man. And And Lauren Goodrich on July 17th is going to write a letter to some of his friends explaining the aftermath of the battle. And he's going to write that the night was still and dark. I could hear the groans of the wounded that lay betwixt the two skirmish lines, nearly half a mile of calling for water. It was a trying scene. There we were on the battlefield, laying down to get a little sleep and rest from the fatigues of the day. As they continue to go out here, begin to come down to try and bury the dead, to get to the wounded, they're going to find many things. Begin to go over, and one of the men, a man by the name of Russell Glenn in the 14th Connecticut, is going to come out somewhere in the front of this line, and he's going to find a young man. Not that old, 19, 20 years old. A young boy in rebel colors. A young Confederate dead who in his hand is holding a photograph, a daguerreotype of a young woman. And Russell Glenn is so moved by that he takes that photograph up. He picks it up and he looks at it and he realizes that that boy only lived a few minutes after he is shot. But in those few minutes, he wanted to look at the face of someone special. A sweetheart, a sister, we don't know. Someone that meant a lot to him. As he begins to look at that, Russell Glenn realizes that this could have been him. It could have been any one of the 14th Connecticut. His mind probably went back and started thinking of little Jeff lying somewhere behind there. Also young, also thinking of a loved one back at home. And Russell Glenn's going to take this photograph with the idea that hopefully he'll be able to figure out who this woman is, who this soldier was, and be able to get this photograph back to her to let her know her sweetheart's fate. But this photograph never finds its way back. He never is able to figure out who the soldier was, what state even that soldier was from. And this remains in his possession until the end of his life in the 1900s. Just one of thousands of these stories. They're going to begin to look around, and as they begin to think about that, this place begins to stick out in many of their minds. They won't be here much longer, however. For many of these men, as they begin to continue to move on, the rains are going to come and go, and the 14th Connecticut's finally going to leave that position right up here. They're going to begin to march across, heading back south, heading back to Virginia. Because Gettysburg is not the end of the war. The war is going to continue for 2 more years. The 14th Connecticut's story is not done by any means. They're going to continue on. They're going to need to have more reinforcements. They've been devastated. And so they're going to find more reinforcements, more conscriptions coming back from back home in Connecticut, refilling their ranks. Men who did not experience Gettysburg. Men who, oftentimes these veterans kind of look at them and go, you're not as good as us. You start to see these divides begin to form, but there are more battlefields where they're all going to become brothers once again. The 14th Connecticut is going to continue on at places like the Wilderness, Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor, Petersburg, until finally in 1865, they're going to be right there at Appomattox Courthouse. These men who had enlisted in August of 1862, who had only had barely a month to learn what it meant to be soldiers before they were sent to the fighting at Antietam, are going to be some of the most hard-fought combat veterans from the state of Connecticut. Over 30 skirmishes and battles that they'll take part in. Many will return home, but many, many more will not. Many of them are going to be left on battlefields just like Gettysburg. And for William Hinks, he's one of the lucky ones. He'll make it through the war entirely unscathed. That following year in 1864, he gets that Medal of Honor citation, but there's still more fighting to come. More fighting for him to continue on, and he will make it all the way to Appomattox Courthouse, be there at the surrender, and he'll make it back home to Connecticut. He'll be married, have a couple of kids, becomes a banker, and he will not die until the 1900s, in 1903, at the age of 62 years old. A long, happy life. Long able to remember the war itself. Remember comrades like little Jeff Brainerd, who are not able to return home, whose bodies just lie here in Gettysburg, lie on other battlefields elsewhere, long forgotten, until someone comes around and is able to tell their story again. For the 14th Connecticut, though, like many veterans, they don't forget about their comrades. They don't forget about what they had experienced. Gettysburg is one of the most monumentated battlefields in the world. You can see we've got over 1,300 monuments, plaques, memorials all over this battlefield. 14th Connecticut's monument is just directly up there. They're going to return here in July of 1884 to dedicate that monument. This is not the best picture in the world, but it gives you an idea of how many veterans are going to return, how important this monument was to them. To return here in July of 1884, years after this battle has come to an end, to remember these men that had fallen, to remember that skirmishing out of that barn, to remember that fight directly in front of them, to remember what they had done, remember their losses. At that speech, on that day when they're dedicating this monument, there are going to be speeches. Just like any good ceremony, you got to have a couple of speeches. One of the men who's going to speak is Chaplain Stevens. And in that speech, he's going to bring up specifically Little Jeff Brainerd, talking about how maybe you haven't probably thought of him in years. And I cannot stop thinking about him, how I was with him in his final few moments. As he stands beside that monument as they're beginning to erect it, beginning to officially dedicate it, he's going to look at these veterans in the eye and he's going to say that your stone is not mortuary, but historic. Not reared in honor of only those who fell here or fought here, but to commemorate the regiment and its history as a whole. Its granite substance felt the shock of the battle which you helped make a victory for the Union, and its base will hold you through ages the position you held. Even to this day, 161 years later, you can still walk up, look at that monument, and it's just a piece of stone. It will not tell you the history. By looking into the lives of men, by coming on programs like this, you can learn a little bit more about men like William Hayes, like Little Jeff Brainerd, like Moses Clemens. You can learn these stories and see the battlefield that they fought on. You can get a little bit of an experience for the heat that they are out in that field in. And I hope today that by coming out on this program, that you guys have a better understanding of just a small portion of this battlefield, a more human understanding. Because oftentimes when we're on this battlefield, we get lost in the magnitude. And those stats of 12,000, 5,000, 6,000 men, of those statistics, of those numbers. And it's easy to lose track, but these are people. But these are men, women, and children who are experiencing this war, whose lives are forever changed, whether it be because they themselves are lost on this battlefield, because they see their friends, their brothers killed, simply because they're so far away from home, they never get to know what happened to their families. And I hope today that as you guys continue along on your day exploring Gettysburg, as you continue exploring anywhere else you may go, these thoughts will be in your mind that you're going to want to continue to explore a little bit deeper. And I want to thank you guys so very much for sticking with me on this hot July day. Hope you've learned a little bit. If you have any final questions, I'm happy to answer them. So thank you guys and enjoy the rest of your day here at Gettysburg.